Welcome back to Mind the People. Grab your flat white, find a comfortable spot, and let us have a proper yarn. I am your host, Elara. I am absolutely keen to get into today's topic. Excuse me, just catching my breath. It is a stunning arbo here, but we are about to dive into something incredibly dark and deeply pervasive in the corporate world. We are talking about leadership today. However, we are not talking about the shiny, polished, motivational version of leadership that you see plastered all over social media. We're not talking about the blokes who wake up at 4 in the morning to run marathons and drink green juice. We are talking about the shadow side of the corner office. We're talking about what happens to a human brain when a person sits in the big chair for too long without anyone ever telling them they're wrong. Today, we are doing a deep dive into an absolutely brilliant and terrifying article. It is called The God in the Corner Office. It was written by Ashrafi Mahbub. Ashrafi is a strategic HR leader. He has over a decade of progressive experience traveling and working across Bangladesh and Australia. He is a bloke who has been in the trenches. He has managed over 110 disciplinary cases in employee relations issues. He has built HR departments from the ground up. He has seen the absolute best and the absolute worst of corporate behaviour. So when he writes about the acquired condition where capable leaders mistake their authority for wisdom, we all need to be paying very close attention. I want to start exactly where Ashrafi starts, with a story. He paints a picture of a boardroom meeting. Listen to this opening line. He writes that the room had the kind of quiet that comes when one person's voice has filled it for too long. Crikey. We all know that exact silence, do we not? There are different types of quiet in a workplace. There is the respectful quiet when someone is saying something brilliant. There is the bored quiet when a meeting could have been an email. And then there is this quiet, the terrified, oppressive quiet. The quiet where everyone is staring at their notepads, refusing to make eye contact with the person at the head of the table. Ashrafi continues. The chief executive was midway through a familiar argument. He had won this argument in this room before. The head of risk leaned forward to offer a number he had not asked for. The chief did not interrupt her. He let the sentence finish. Then he looked at her, smiled the way one smiles at a child who has misread a situation, and said with great gentleness that he understood her concerns. But they had already considered all of that. The conversation moved on. That condescending smile. It makes my blood boil just reading it out loud. A smile like that is honestly worse than being shouted at. It completely strips the professional of their dignity. It shrinks them down to a toddler. And the aftermath of that tiny violent interaction is exactly what you would expect. Ashrafi notes that by the time the meeting ended 40 minutes later, 3 senior people in the room had quietly redrafted the questions they had come to ask. They learned their lesson instantly. Do not speak up. Do not challenge the bloke in charge. Keep your head down and survive the hour. The next morning, the head of risk sent her concerns by email to no one in particular. She just wanted to mark the file. She was protecting herself. And 18 months later, when the massive financial position she had warned about completely unwound and destroyed the firm's books, a regulator asked her what she had said and to whom. Her answer, given under oath, was that she had said it, but no one had been listening. This is not just a tragic anecdote. Ashrafi points out that this is a predictable clinical pattern. It has a name. He references a 2000 paper published in the medical journal Brain. It was written by psychiatrists David Owen and Jonathan Davidson. They named this phenomenon Hubris Syndrome. They described it as an acquired personality disorder of the possession of power. I want to focus on that clinical word for a minute. Acquired. That is the truly terrifying part of this entire concept. This is not a character flaw the leader carried into the building on their first day. It is not that the board of directors accidentally hired a raging narcissist. I mean, I reckon that happens heaps too, but that is a different problem. This condition develops over time. Sometimes it happens slowly, and sometimes it happens with disconcerting speed. It happens to people who hold substantial authority for long periods without serious correction. It is an illness caused by unchecked power. Owen and Davidson set out 14 behavioral criteria for this diagnosis. A lot of these criteria travel directly into the corporate setting. One of the major ones is a narcissistic conflation of self and institution. The chief comes to speak of the firm's interests and his own personal interests as if they were a single thing. I'm sure you have heard leaders talk like this. They stop saying the company and start saying my company or my vision, even if they're just an employee of the shareholders like everyone else. There is also a profound loss of contact with reality. Ashrafi makes a brilliant distinction here. He says this is not psychosis. It is a more pedestrian failure. It is the slow drift away from the data the organization actually produces and towards the version of events the chief prefers to hear. They surround themselves with yes men. They filter out the noise. Unfortunately for them, the noise is usually the truth. The question we have to ask is not why some leaders are like this. The question is why the structural experience of holding senior authority is so consistently corrosive for any human being. Before we look at the neurological answer to that question, let us take a quick look at what you have been saying online. I posted a little teaser about this topic yesterday, and my goodness, my phone has not stopped buzzing. We love getting your quick takes and live reactions, so please keep sending them to x.com/astrofied99. We had a fascinating comment come through from a listener named Sarah. Sarah writes, Elara, I love the show, but I have a bit of a pushback on this idea of it being an acquired condition. Are we letting these leaders off the hook? Is it really the structure that ruins them? Or are we just building corporate systems that actively reward and promote people who already lack empathy? It feels like you need a god complex just to survive the interview process for a CEO role these days. Sarah, mate, that is a fair dinkum brilliant point. You are absolutely spot on about the selection bias in corporate promotions. We definitely confuse confidence with competence all the time. The people who are relentlessly loud, the ones who never show a shred of doubt, those are often the blokes who get tapped on the shoulder for the corner office. So yes, the system absolutely selects for big egos. However, what Ashrafi is arguing, and what the science backs up, is that even if you take a genuinely good, humble, empathetic person and put them in that chair, the structure of power will begin to corrode their brain. It is the power itself that does the damage if it is not heavily constrained. The system does not just select for hubris, it manufactures it. Keep the comments coming, Sarah. That was a fantastic addition to the yarn. Right, let us get back to the article and talk about the actual neurology of power, because this is where things get incredibly unsettling. Ashrafi brings up the work of a researcher named Dr. Keltner. Keltner has spent the better part of 2 decades studying what happens to people once they acquire power over other. The central finding of his work is honestly a bit of a tragedy. Keltner found that the social skills which earn people authority in the first place are the exact same skills that erode once authority is held. Think about that for a second. The empathy, the attentiveness, the ability to read a room, the listening skills, all the things that made you a great manager and got you promoted to director, those skills decline measurably in subjects who have been given even modest amounts of power. They call it empathy decay. It sounds like a horrific disease. Ashrafi notes that this empathy decay aligns perfectly with the challenges he faces when mediating workplace conflicts. He references a 2014 study by researchers at McMaster University. They found that power actually dampens the brain's mirroring response. The mirroring response is the neural mechanism that allows a human being to take another person's perspective. It physically stops working as effectively when you are the boss. You literally lose the biological capacity to put yourself in someone else's shoes. It is staggering to think about. Layered onto this neurological shift is a behavioral shift. Ashrafi points to a 2011 paper by Arya Chatterjee and Donald Hambrick. They found that highly narcissistic chief executives were strikingly unresponsive to objective indicators of how their firms were actually performing. They did not care about the spreadsheets. They did not care about the risk reports. Ashrafi writes a line here that I absolutely love. He says, they listen to applause, they do not listen to data. We are going to talk about the massive hidden costs of this behavior in just a tick. I will be sure to link all of these studies, along with the full article, in the show notes over at our central hub, AshrafiMahbub.com. You can find all our past episodes there too. But right now, I am very keen to get into our movie moment. Every week I like to recommend a film that connects thematically to what we are discussing. I try to pick something you can watch this weekend with a mate or a partner to keep the conversation going. Today, I am recommending the 2011 financial thriller Margin Call. If you have not seen this film, you are in for an absolute treat. Margin call takes place over a single 24-hour period at a massive Wall Street investment bank. It is set during the very beginning of the 2008 financial crisis. The film is practically a cinematic mirror to the opening anecdote of Ashrafi's article. We watch a junior risk analyst discover that the firm is holding toxic assets that are mathematically guaranteed to destroy the entire company. He tries to push this terrifying data up the chain of command. The film culminates in a late-night boardroom meeting with the chief executive. His name is John Told, and he is played with terrifying brilliance by Jeremy Irons. Told is the ultimate god in the corner office. He sits at the head of the table eating a full meal while everyone else in the room is sweating bullets and contemplating the end of their careers. He is completely detached from the human reality of the situation. When the complex financial data is finally presented to him, Told demands that the analyst explain it to him as if he were a young child or a golden retriever. It is quite a funny line in the moment, but it highlights exactly what we are discussing today. Told has completely lost touch with the granular reality of his own firm. He does not understand the products his company sells. He only understands the power he holds. The movie also perfectly captures the complicity of everyone around the leader. You watch senior deputies and department heads twisting themselves into knots. They are desperately trying to agree with the CEO while simultaneously trying to save their own necks. In that boardroom, intelligent dissent is punished instantly. Blind loyalty is the only currency that matters. I reckon Margin Call is one of the most accurate depictions of corporate hubris ever put on film. It is gripping, it is infuriating, and it is entirely relevant to the acquired condition of power. Definitely give it a watch this weekend and let me know what you think. All right, let us get back to Ashrafi's article. We need to talk about the hidden costs of this hubris. It is not just about the leader being an absolute nightmare to work with. It costs real money and it destroys immense value. Ashrafi points to another study by Chatterjee and Hambrick from 2007. This study looked at over 100 chief executives. It found that narcissistic chiefs produced markedly more extreme and volatile outcomes for their companies. They drove massive strategic dynamism, both for and against their firms. The shareholder was basically paying for a high variance bet without getting any compensating expected return. It is like putting the entire company budget on red at the roulette table just because the boss feels lucky. Beneath these massive board-level findings sits a quieter but equally damaging mechanism. This is the suppression of information up the chain. Ashrafi brings in Amy Edmondson's foundational 1999 research on psychological safety. Edmondson demonstrated something incredibly counterintuitive. She proved that high-performing teams actually report more errors, not fewer. Let that sink in for a moment. High performance does not come from the absence of error. It comes from the willingness to surface the error immediately. When people feel safe, they admit their mistakes so the team can fix them. Where reporting is low, the silence is not safety, it is suppression. In his own HR practice, Ashrafi notes that fostering a culture of trust and procedural fairness is critical. Having managed so many employee relations issues, he has seen firsthand that employees frequently withhold important information from a manager because they fear the consequences of speaking up. This anticipatory self-censorship is learned over time. It is learned from small signals. A raised eyebrow, a dismissive wave of the hand, a condescending smile. A God-complex chief produces a wider distribution of strategic outcomes, a board that has stopped resisting, and a workforce that has stopped respecting what it sees. Together, these elements remove almost every single mechanism by which an organization might catch itself before making a fatal mistake. And this brings us to the most uncomfortable part of the article, the complicity around the leader. None of this happens to a leader in isolation. The God complex is a shared performance. It is sustained by an entire supporting cast of enablers. The board of directors plays the largest role here, where directors are nominally independent but practically deferential. Their moderating function evaporates completely. The board stops being a check on power and simply becomes a gallery. They sit there and applaud the performance. Beneath the board sit the deputies. These are highly intelligent people who learned very quickly that intelligent dissent is more costly to them personally than intelligent agreement. They choose their mortgages over their morals. Then we have the HR function. Ashrafi is incredibly candid here, which I deeply respect given his profession. He says that the HR department in many organizations completes the circle of complicity, where HR sits administratively beneath the chief executive. with no direct line to the board of directors. It tends to absorb the chief's worldview rather than challenge it. I have seen this happen heaps of times. HR becomes the enforcement arm of the CEO's ego. Having built HR departments and established foundational compliance frameworks himself, Ashrafi understands the profound danger of a deferential HR team. The corrective architecture might be present on paper. You might have all the right policies in your employee handbook. But in practice, the correction remains completely absent. So what on earth is the path forward? Are we just doomed to work under corporate dictators until the end of time? Thankfully, Ashrafi says no. But he insists that if the diagnosis is structural, the response must be structural too. We cannot just ask leaders to be nicer. We have to change the scaffolding around them. Drawing on empirical research and his own experience driving organizational development, he breaks the corrective work down into 3 vital layers. The first layer is leader behavior. We must frame the work as a learning problem rather than an execution problem. The surfacing of difficulty must be treated as a core competence. If you find a flaw in the plan, you should be celebrated, not punished. Leaders must openly acknowledge their own fallibility. They have to admit when they do not know the answer. Ashrafi mentions Google's internal Project Aristotle study. That study found that psychological safety was the single strongest predictor of team effectiveness. Period. The second layer is structural dissent. This is absolutely my favorite part of the proposed solutions. Boards of directors that take their jobs seriously need to make use of red team reviews. A red team is a concept borrowed from the military and intelligence communities. It means that a specific subset of directors is officially tasked with constructing the strongest possible case against a proposed action before it is approved. You literally build disagreement into the approval process. It is no longer considered rude to disagree. It is your assigned job. Ashrafi also argues that meaningful term limits and accountability mechanisms are essential. The longer a chief sits in the chair, the heavier the structural counterweight has to be to keep them grounded. The third layer is cultural shifts. We have to eradicate the soft, toxic language that suggests disagreement is personally disloyal. Mature institutions rehabilitate disagreement. They view it as a sign of respect rather than an act of rebellion. They distinguish sharply and publicly between insubordination and the professional duty to surface what one sees. If I tell you a project is failing, I am not being insubordinate. I am doing my job. Ashrafi's closing thoughts are incredibly poignant. He writes that what is lost when leaders confuse their authority with their wisdom is ultimately a matter of institutional memory. The organization under such a leader literally stops being able to learn. The signals that once traveled upward honestly are filtered, polished, and eventually completely invented. The chief becomes the last person to know the truth. As an HR professional who builds and relies upon data dashboards to understand the reality of a workforce, Ashrafi knows that the gap between what a leader believes and what the data actually shows is perilous. By the time the regulator revises, or the auditor finds the unreconciled balance, or the talented deputy quietly packs up their desk and resigns, the gap has grown too wide to close in time. He ends with this brilliant, devastating sentence. The ethical failures of senior leaders are rarely the failures of weak people. They are the failures of successful ones. That is a heavy thought to sit with, but an incredibly important one. I really want to know what you all reckon about this. Have you worked for a god in the corner office? Did you manage to escape, or did you try to change the system from within? Send me your stories. You can drop a comment on the video version of this episode over on YouTube. Just search for youtube.com/@mindthepeople. If you are a professional looking to continue this conversation in a bit more of a formal setting, come and connect with Ashrafi on LinkedIn. His profile is linkedin.com/in/Ashrafi Mahbub. He's always keen for a good yarn about workplace culture. And of course, if you want to read his brilliant article in its entirety or subscribe for his written deep dives, head straight to ashrafimahbub.substack.com or zobstack.com. It has been absolutely lovely chatting with you this Arvo. Please share this episode with a mate or a colleague who might need to hear it. And if you have a spare minute, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps the show heaps. I will be back next week with another deep dive. Until then, keep questioning the consensus, stay safe out there, and mind the people. No worries at all, and see you later.